The music business is in serious trouble. Or is it? That depends on your perspective. Let's talk about it. From New York City, this is How to Fix the Music Business, and I'm your host, Jim McDermott. All right, good stuff. That was Feather in the Breeze by Big Hat from their 2012 self-titled EP. My guest on the show today is one of the founding members of that band, guitarist Peter Stroud. Peter Stroud gets around. It's funny how often I'm sitting in front of the TV late at night, flipping around the channels, and I come across Peter on stage somewhere. He's played with Pete Droge, Sarah McLachlan, Don Henley, recorded on albums with Stevie Nicks, the Dixie Chicks, Shawn, Mullins, and Malone. As a guitarist and musical director of Sheryl Crow's band, Peter has been a recurring player in her creative legacy going all the way back to her smash album, The Globe Sessions. Alongside Sheryl, he has shared the stage with Eric Clapton, Keith Richards, Prince, Chrissie Hynde, and countless other musical legends. Now that's a full plate by anyone's measure, but like I said, Peter gets around. He co-founded a hugely successful guitar amplifier company, 65 Amps, and is a partner in the recently launched Emerging Artist Network, a company that connects developing artists with brand patronage. Now, Big Hat's EP was self-released, no record company was involved, so all the promotion and marketing was on the band. The track Feather in the Breeze was added to a couple of popular playlists on Spotify, and it ended up getting over 1 million plays. Because there was no record company, the money went straight to the band. You know, there's a lot of debate and mystery about where the money goes in streaming. Are there streaming companies screwing over the artists? Are there record companies? So when I invited Peter on the show, I asked him if he could share the real numbers of what the band got paid, and he gracefully agreed. I think you'll all find this very interesting. I know I did. Peter's been a working professional musician for 3 decades. That's a lot of miles under his wheels. We talk about a ton of varied stuff in this episode. It's just so great. So right now, I want to welcome Mr. Peter Stroud to How to Fix the Music Business. What's up, Peter?
Man, it's great to be with you, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So the first time I became aware of you, and I think I may have told you this story when I met you at some point, I saw you playing with Pete Droge at the Bottom Line in like 96 or 97. It was on Find a Door, and I think some guys from the Yankees came on stage and played with you guys.
Oh my gosh, yes, that was when Bernie Williams jammed with us. Were you there during sound check that afternoon?
No, I was just a Pete fan. So no, I came in like all the other schlubs at at 8:30 or whatever into the Bottom Line.
Let me tell you, that gig, what they did, it was a big old press event at sound check. So every sports page was at our photographer. The sports pages was at our sound check, and thanks to Bernie Williams, I was probably the first guitarist to be pictured in the sports section of the LA Times. Literally, and it was I think it was Mike Campbell. It was a couple of the Heartbreakers guys that sent me a copy. Where they had seen it. It was on the front page of the sports section. So I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, it was funny because I remember it being in, I think, the Daily News and the Post and stuff the next day, because I think I can't remember the timing of the gig, whether it was they were in the run for the World Series or whether the World Series had already happened and they had won it, or what the deal was. But it was like Yankee fever in New York, and I just showed up because I was a Pete fan, and then it was like it turned into this Yankee mania at some point during the gig.
The bottom line, that was a big night for me, because the bottom line was legendary. When I was younger, right out of high school, I made a trip. I was actually in this cover band, and somewhere along the way, we ended up in New York City for a couple of days, and I saw two shows at the bottom line at that time. I saw Elvin Jones one night, and then I caught Todd Rundgren doing The Hermit of Mink Hollow.
Wow.
So, the bottom line was always on my radar. So, yeah, that was a big night to play. And needless to say, playing with Pete was a total highlight in my career.
The bottom line now is just the building it's in is just another NYU building.
Is it?
Yeah, and I walk by there, and I get a little wince every time I walk by, because you used to walk by the bottom line. It was on the corner, right by West 4th Street and Broadway. It was a couple of blocks. It was like a block off Broadway. But you used to walk by, and there would be a sign outside, like a board that just said all the people that were coming up, and it would. There would be kind of some folky people, but then they would have totally up and coming new acts and legendary artists, and it was just the best place to see a gig. I mean, Neil Young did some famous bootlegs there, and I was there the night that Paul Simon came in and saw Edie Brickell playing and like fell in love with her.
Wow.
And it was funny. I was working Edie's first record at the time, Shooting at the Stars at Rubber Bands, and Paul Simon just came in and sat at a different table from Art Garfunkel, so they were both there, but to see her gig. But she just stared at him. He stared at her, rather, the whole time. And I said to her the next day in the office, because she came into the Warner offices, and I was like, "Man, Paul Simon was just like staring at you the whole time." And she said, "Oh, I couldn't see him because of the lights." She said, "Thank God, because I would have freaked out if I had seen Paul Simon in the audience." And then, yeah, they end up getting married. So, but yeah, what an incredible venue the bottom line was. Just amazing.
When I was a kid, or my mother would get the New York Times, the Sunday one, and I would just browse through the music section, and I'd always look to see who was playing at the bottom line, and the other venues. But yeah,
what was it like with you guys, with Pete, in those days, having a label behind him? Can you share a little bit about the old days?
Yeah, well, that's definitely the days of yore now, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, they were incredibly supportive of Pete. I joined on with him, I guess, in June, about a half year after his first record had come out, Necktie Second.
Yeah.
And so he was riding on the success of If You Don't Love Me, I'll Kill Myself. And so he was getting a lot of support and a lot of attention. He was getting these great tours. When I joined on, the first thing was a 30-day tour in Europe, playing a bunch of festivals. And that was followed up by 2 months touring with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, who he had already been out with. And those kind of tours continued. And so, yeah, the support from the label, was tremendous. He had graduated to a bus. You would go to the gigs, and there was always somebody there. He was, of course, doing the press. We were doing in-stores. It was all highly coordinated.
When you think about the way the music business is now relative to that, in terms of what's it like going out on the road now, and do you see anybody? Do you encounter people from labels? What's it like?
Well, from the perspective of Sheryl, absolutely. The support team has always been out there with her last record, Feels Like Home. And the team was always out. I think that perspective would be entirely different if I was with a up and coming artist. I guess maybe I'm not the person to ask. I would imagine it's changed considerably. Maybe I'd compare it to, say, the Wild Feathers, where they're on Warner. They were out with us for a while, and maybe I was oblivious, but I cannot recall there being the similar kind of presence that I saw with Pete back in the days. But I know they had support. That's they're definitely a band that that appears to have been nurtured all along the way by Warner. So it does still exist, but I think it's considerably way less.
Besides the label, the old days of kind of going out and doing in stores and meeting radio people and having that whole culture, backstage and all these hands to shake and stuff. Do you still feel that presence on the road, or does that seem like it's maybe not as substantial as it used to be?
Doing in stores
and meeting retail people and radio people and stuff like that, I guess.
Yes, well, absolutely. This last go round with Sheryl, there was a major press on that because the record came out on Warner Nashville, and Sheryl 100% embraced the country radio way of doing things, which in large part was similar to the way it's always been in the rock world. She made over 100 radio station visits, be it performing on air, doing on air interviews, doing what they call guitar pools, where they have multiple singer songwriter country artists performing their songs at a radio station promoted events. And it's almost like songwriters in the round kind of format, but on a stage in a small theater.
Yep.
So yes, there was a ton of that. Like I said, she did over 100. We counted.
I saw quite a few of them where you guys were up super, super early, drinking tea, wearing scarves, being on like a morning show with some DJ at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, wow, that definitely is the old school way of doing it, making the rounds and shaking hands and winning people over one station at a time.
Yes, and they really appreciated it, and it was total fun for us. We enjoyed it. Even going into a conference room sometimes, and there they were thrilled to actually be seeing Sheryl give them that kind of attention and time, after she's already an incredibly well-known artist. And, for us to be able to stand up there and no microphones or anything, just with acoustic guitars and playing it really was a nice thing to return to. It makes you play differently, makes you sing the songs differently, and the whole interaction with everybody, it was great.
Obviously, in country music, part of what you got to do is have the chops and be able to get up and play. That's always been part of the legacy of what country music's been about. So.
Yeah, and in the pop world too, or the rock world, and I'm sure, like I said, with, for instance, Wild Feathers, or there's other bands that are out there playing, and I'm sure they're doing it I know they are. Jason Isbell, over the years of watching him independently promote his record, I'm sure he and his management team and 30 Tigers have set up that whole routine for him and schedule for him along the way.
It's so funny that you mentioned Jason Isbell, because I just listened to last week. I don't know if you know the guitarist from Foo Fighters, Chris Shiflett.
Yes.
Well, Chris has a podcast.
Yes, I need to listen to that. I hear it's great.
He did an episode with Isbell. It's just so great. I mean, Isbell sounds like such a good guy, and it's so funny because he cops to some of his shortcomings when he was younger in terms of partying, when he was in Drive-By Truckers and stuff. But the way that they talk about just making records and getting on the road and promoting them and writing songs and what that process is like, it's so undiluted. It's really, really pure. The way that Isbell talks, it's really great to hear him just rap about what he does, because there's no pretense. It's the guy. And Shiflett's got it's a really good podcast called Walking the Floor. Anybody who's listening to the show should definitely check it out.
Yeah, and here's Jason is a prime example of somebody who, he's been around the corner. He's still very young. He is really come into his own now as obviously as we've seen as a singer-songwriter, and he's bearing the fruits of it now. He's actually able to get out and perform, make a good living at it. He's headlining, and is great. He really became the consummate artist. And that is so difficult. I've heard you talk about this with others, and it is so difficult this day and age for artists to be able to be able to sustain long enough to to get to that level without bottoming out or without having to divert some other direction.
Well, that's a good segue to talk about how your feelings are about the current state of the music business for artists. What are your general thoughts about how things have changed?
Well, I look at it in two scopes. I think that it is a fabulous time because an artist does have the capability to do exactly what they want to do. And if they have the wherewithal to be able to market themselves, or at least if they can align themselves with somebody in their camp directly or indirectly, whatever, to be able to help them on that end of it, then it's great. They can be totally self-sufficient. On the other hand, I have come to, having been in that period, going back to the Droge days in the 90s and being exposed to a lot of folks such as yourself that were on the industry side. And I definitely have full respect for that mentality and everybody that was in that world where artists' heads aren't. You want the musician to be musicians, and there's almost this contradiction of, well, no, I'm not supposed to do all that marketing. I'm supposed to just write and perform. I'm an artist. That's what I'm supposed to do. And there's a lot of guys and girls that should be left to just do that and leave the marketing and strategizing to somebody else in the business world. So, there's two sides. So what I would like to see come around is a better blending of the two. The thing that concerns me more about artists nowadays is them being able to sustain themselves long enough to where they develop enough as an artist. You see bands or you see young artists, right out of high school or right out of college or during college or whatever, and they show promises as a songwriter or an artist, as a performer. But, realistically, they can only be good for one couch surfing tour before they get home and, they're broke or whatever, or now they're married and about to have a child. And they go, you know what? That was all fun, but I got to do something serious. I've got to make a living. And so I think we're cut short compared to earlier days where, you did have, even as crooked as the industry seemed at certain times, and it obviously was, and in other ways it did allow there were pros in the industry that allowed artists time to develop and took them through the paces. And that's what we need to see come more around in some shape or form.
The days of old when, maybe you'd put out 4 or 5 records, maybe you wouldn't pop until your 3rd record, 4th record. There's not a lot of companies out there, major record companies anyway, that are giving artists that kind of time to develop. And you have to wonder what we're missing musically because somebody's expected to deliver so quickly, and what kind of compromises that leads an artist to make in order to try to achieve that artistically.
Right. Now, bear in mind, of course, back in the day, I'd heard stories about bands, like Aerosmith on their first couple of records. Even after Get Your Wings, they were being threatened with, if you guys don't deliver, you're out of here. And they had to make their records in record time. They just went in and bashed them out and they were out of there. So it wasn't like they had these giant budgets. I think the budgets that were given to bands, afforded to bands in the 90s, totally dwarfed what some of those guys were getting. But at least maybe it was managed better back then. Maybe, I could, I heard your buddy with Vinyl Me Please, talk about, bring up the Bruce Springsteen thing. And I've thought about that many times, that, if Springsteen wasn't able to make it to Born to Run, we'd probably never know about him. The thing I'm afraid of is I'm just afraid we are going to miss a lot of good musicians. That carrot is no longer there. That carrot of the days, when I was growing up, we're like, man, we could live like Led Zeppelin. We could, Yeah, we could be kings.
Well, you
know,
could live like Kanye, I guess. If
Oh,
you know?
yeah, now it could be that. Yeah, obviously they have it. I can go out and buy a castle. Yeah.
Yeah.
That at least was a carrot that, alongside with playing and wanting to play, was just something that was that pie in the sky sort of dream. Even though it wouldn't come to anywhere near that, but at least it was something that made you feel like, wow, that's something I want to do. And I think I'm afraid, and there's a lot of things, believe me, you've got so much stuff coming at an audience now, between, in media, with computers and the whole bit, that we're just in a different time now. I don't think it'll be that way anytime soon. I never want to say, never again, but we're just in different times. So, but I am concerned about us not seeing really gifted songwriters come to fruition.
There is this argument that maybe some of those people in the old days didn't get their proper shot because of the way that the system was set up, and that now at least those people can put their records out themselves and maybe get discovered. And the cost of entry, I mean, the ability for artists to put something out and distribute it globally is totally inconsequential. Getting people to pay attention to it is obviously the challenge. What you have to do to get attention in this world, it's almost like there's more thought put into how do I get the attention at times than making sure that the work is really great. Or let's say it's challenging for artists to figure out, well, how can I balance trying to get this attention in this world where nobody has an attention span anymore, and balance that with really creating something worthwhile. What are your thoughts on that?
That's the big thing, is that there is so much music out there now. There's such a high volume compared to back in the day, where the filters were the record labels, and they did have the John Hammonds and the Ahmet Ertegans and so forth that knew how to detect a good artist when they saw him in the first place. Now it's almost like the consumer is left to being that A&R guy in a way. Where do you begin? There's just so much. So I think the key thing is whoever can become the filter. And they all talk about influencers and so forth, but I think it's a lot more than that. I don't know if that was answering your question, but it made me think of that at least.
Well, it was a trick question, because I don't think there is an answer, because if anybody had figured it out, it would be a headline all over the place. It's just the daily struggle. And there is a ton of music out there. Some of it is great. I think music is as good now as it ever has been.
Yeah.
But it takes so much digging to find it, and you have to be a really, really dedicated music fan to find it. And thank God that there are pathways to find stuff that you like that maybe weren't there before. It isn't the 2 rock radio stations in town anymore. It's a multitude of things, but you have to be pretty dedicated to find what you like. That's for sure.
Right. And I think maybe every generation, the millennials, people my age or whatever, have their own way of filtering and their own interests. I mean, good Lord, there's just so much music. I was listening to Vinyl Me Please's suggested listenings, and that stuff is great. There's some great music on there. And then from my perspective, I always seem to filter with, they sound great. Now I wonder what they're like live. Do they hold up live? And so the bands that make the biggest, or artists that make the biggest impact on me, are those that really pull it off live, where you look at them and you go, okay, that right there is a star. And they're not just a star because they're, this enigmatic character. Well, that's part of it, but it's also because they got great songs. They draw you in, and when you feel like you're an old fuddy-duddy that's heard it all, it takes a lot to do that.
This is, again, another opportune time to segue, because you have a project that you've been working on for the past few years called Big Hat. And one of the ways that I think people find out about new artists is via proximity to other artists and things like playlists. And you have a track called Feather in the Breeze on Spotify that had 1.2 million plays. It was from a self-released record, right?
Correct, yes.
And the way that people found it, because I went on and I looked at the playlist, there was a Southern rock playlist that had all sorts of legacy Southern rock stuff, and then there were new artists. And I'm assuming, and hopefully you can tell us some more about it, that people found you because they said, "Hey, let me check out some Southern rock," and they were listening to Skinner and the Outlaws and a whole bunch of other stuff, and then heard your track and said, "Yeah, this is really cool," and that's how you got those listens. So, can you talk a little bit about what that's been like, being on a playlist and having people find their way to through proximity and association with other artists in a similar genre?
Yes. Well, that was the Big Hat project. That was sort of my dream ultimate band to put together at the time. I had become good friends with Audley Freed, who's a spectacular guitarist that had his own band called Cry of Love, and then he was with the Black Crowes. By the time I met him, it turned out we were both from North Carolina originally, and we became best buddies. And then one time I was in Nashville, and also almost at the same time, I got to know a singer-songwriter named Keith Gaddis, who's from Texas originally, but he hovered between Texas and Nashville, and he had invited me to play on his record that he was making at the time, and so it all converged, and then. So to me, that was the ultimate band idea, was to sort of mix and match. Take Keith Gaddis, who's from the country world. Ollie and I are from similar rock worlds. And then I have this other friend, Ike Stubblefield, who is a just incredible B3 player, Jimmy Smith style jazz, more of a jazz type B3 player. So just mix all these different types of players into and see what would come of it. We just wrote the songs, had never played a lick together once, never even rehearsed the songs. And then I booked some time in a great studio, Southern Tracks, that was the home of Brendan O'Brien here in Atlanta, where he had recorded so many tremendous records, Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots and so forth, and then and Springsteen, and worked with his engineer, Nick DiDia, who produced us. And so we just went in for 2 days and recorded 4 songs, never played a lick together ever. And it was one of those magical moments. And so we put that out as an EP. And so I had CDs printed up at the time. I put it through TuneCore, went through all the paces, and then we got a little bit sidetracked. Everybody was already busy as it was, but then at that same time, Sheryl was in need of a new band, and since she was going more down that Nashville direction, I thought to myself, well, good Lord, my band is perfect for that, or at least a handful of the players that were Nashville based and knew the country world authentically as well as the rock world authentically. I said, this is the perfect band. And that's what the band is now. So that sort of sidelined us. And at the same time, Keith Gaddis, who had already signed a publishing deal, he got on the stick and started concentrating solely on that, and then penned hits for Kenny Chesney and George Strait and all these folks, and has had tremendous success as a songwriter and now as a producer. So that record sat dormant. We did a little bit of press at the beginning. It was all totally homegrown, totally on our own. Just out of the blue, it ended up on 2 playlists on Spotify, which apparently there was a fan there, and I think I haven't spoken to them, but I can sort of assume that perhaps the curator of the playlist might have been a fan of Audley's, because I also noticed Cry of Love songs on there. But one of them was the funky, heavy, bluesy playlist, and the other was It's a Southern Thing. And the funky, heavy, bluesy, actually, I think that had the higher count of followers.
Yeah, and it's not on that playlist anymore, because I looked.
Right, it's no longer on that playlist, and it lived on there forever.
And that's an important thing, because in an episode with Simon Wheeler, we were talking about the difference between getting a track on a playlist that somebody puts together with a bunch of different stuff versus people adding your record to their personal collection. Because on a playlist, it could, like this one you guys were on there for a while, got a bunch of listens, but then the person decided to change it up, and you're not on there anymore. So to actually get the plays and to get the revenue, it's a better thing to have somebody actually add your record to their collection, because then you're getting paid hopefully over the years as opposed to just for the time that you're on the playlist.
Yes, and again, then you get into the whole question about Spotify about, all right, is this really, are you considering this a revenue generator or an exposure generator? And
Hopefully both. Hopefully both.
Hopefully both. I wish I was more of a scholar business person, but I'm not, to really know how to get into that, because there's the whole question of, all right, how do you compare the number of streams versus airplay? You're put on rotation on a radio station, in a city like LA or something. And the revenue that generates versus the revenue from streams. When I look at the revenue that was earned from that song, because of the fact that we've received that money directly, is significant. But, by the time it gets watered down, if you're with a record label, forget about it. It's totally all about the exposure.
So can you share what the number was that you guys got for getting 1.2 million plays from Spotify?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Here, let me look.
This is going to be amazing, because that you're an artist that is not having it get watered down by the label. So this will be the undiluted, like, here's the real deal when you get 1 million plays on Spotify. Here's the check you get.
I just recently pulled it up and looking here. All right, okay. So for Spotify, for Feather in the Breeze alone, all right, the stream count on Spotify alone, this is not all the others.
Yeah.
Is at this count is 1,156,030 plays, 30 streams.
Okay.
Earned $4,467.71 to date. And I calculated that rate out. It comes out to 0.0038647 cents.
Which is kind of to be expected, right? I mean, that's what the kind of numbers are. I mean, I guess the radio conversation, if you were getting plays in a major market, it would depend on what your rotation was. Were you getting played in the afternoon drive? Was it an ad, but it was a paper ad, so you're getting played at 4 o'clock in the morning once a week? You wouldn't be paid for the record being, as an artist, the sound recording. You wouldn't get paid for the sound recording being played on the radio, because unfortunately in the U.S., artists don't get paid for sound recordings. Only the songwriter gets paid on terrestrial radio.
Right. Right. And that's also the flip-flop here too. I think I'm correctly considering this income that's earned is more of a mechanical. It's definitely not going into the publishing stream.
Yeah, I guess the publishing is paid. Well, I don't know what the accounting is in front of you, but it's just per plays. It's for the sound recording. It's not.
Yeah. This is the money I received through TuneCore. This is the money they collected. And I don't think that is, I think that's more like streams per streams. That's the big problem, is that from a songwriter's perspective, that's nothing. I've heard of friends that were songwriters of songs that were mega hits by mega artists and receiving their publishing cut, of a few $1,000s on the publishing end. So that's a whole different thing. Whereas the streams obviously would be very significant to the artist or to the label, and then trickling down to the artist from there.
Yeah, I guess if you were a solo artist, if you weren't splitting it up amongst a band, but if you were a solo artist and you had 10 to 15 million streams on a self-release record, you could make a little living out of it. I mean,
you're doing all right there. That's where that money is significant revenue that goes in the pot alongside of your live performance revenue. That's different. And so that brings us back around to, okay, hey man, if you can do this yourself and you can set up your own team and your own marketing and everything else related, that's the way to go.
Yeah, if it's going through a label, by the time the label steps on it and takes out what you owe them from your advance and marketing and recording costs and everything, that $4,000 check might have been a check for $12, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you can do it in-house and hire people to market, hire people to promote your new album or your new single in targeted markets, that to me seems to make more sense.
In regards to Big Hat, I know you've got some plans to get the band happening again. I gave it a listen, Feather in the Breeze, and it really reminded me of like 461 Ocean Boulevard, Eric Clapton, but with Joe Walsh with a little country inflection singing. Like it was really cool, and anybody listening to the podcast should definitely check out Big Hat on Spotify. What are you guys doing next with that act, Pete?
Well, I got to comment to you just on what you just said there. You were so spot on. Literally, when I heard Keith Gaddis singing one of those songs, it was either Delilah or Feather in the Breeze. And that was literally, like I said, the first time that I had ever heard him really sing it. You know, obviously we were writing songs together and went through that phase, but hearing him sing a performance of it was in the studio. And I thought the same thing. I said, wow, man, he sounds sort of like Joe Walsh there. You know, or a little bit. It's sort of like Joe Walsh mixed with the band, you know, and obviously it's Keith Gaddis, but it's so funny you mentioned Joe Walsh.
Well, and the 461 thing, I mean, you and Audley on that record, just nobody's showing off, and it's just really tasty, and it's just good music. If anybody here is a fan of that period of music, but updated and made your own, then you'll definitely dig Big Hat. So I wanted to ask you about a little something that happened right after Prince died. You had a dusty VHS tape of a performance that you did with Sheryl up in Canada, I think it was, and at the time he was known as the artist formerly known as Prince, came on stage and did Every Day is a Winding Road with you guys.
Right, yeah.
And you put it up, I think, on a Saturday morning or something like that. And when you put it up, it was funny because when I saw it, it had maybe like 12 views. And I checked today, and it's got 500,000 views on YouTube now. During his life, he probably would have had an army of lawyers like sent out letters to say take that down, although it was Sheryl's track, so I don't know if he could have done that. But what are your thoughts on the YouTube thing and whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing? We're back to that conversation, exposure versus revenue, but I guess Prince's big issue with it was that he wasn't being paid the way that he thought he should get paid. How do you feel about the whole YouTube thing?
You know, I totally understand where he was coming from. Obviously that video was a little different. For one, he was a guest on Sheryl's show. It was her song. And yeah, I had been looking for that video forever and just couldn't put my hands on it. I had gotten it at the time of the show where I went immediately to the video booth at that venue and asked for a copy of it. And then it was just one of those things where that Friday night prior to posting, I said, all right, darn it, I'm just going to go to the task and find it. And after a year of looking, I found it within 10 minutes. Wow. And so made the transfer. But, you know, in terms of his other stuff, I understand an artist that wants to have control over what is out there and what's not. I'm that way. I mean, there's certain things that I really regret that are out there or that get posted and I cringe or wince, you know? So could you imagine as an artist that has really put a lot of effort and time into the way something is, if they're not happy with the performance, then they don't want it out there. And, you know, I think it's to each his own in that regard. It does get back to what the purpose of it is. In some ways, I love it. I go down that YouTube rabbit hole as much as the next guy. Many of wee hours where I'm posting 3 a.m. of some cool live performance. Yeah, it's been a great exposure tool to many. So in this day and age, in this Wild West, it's to each his own. I think somebody like Prince has every bit the right to say whether or not they want it online.
Yeah, and I think that is a good way to look at it, to say it's up to the artist. It's up to the person who created the music. It's funny, but Prince, in a way, I wonder if things are going to end up like they did with Hendrix, where there's all these releases that come out that are things that he half-finished, or some little jam or something like that, and yet, you know, 40 years after his death, they're still putting stuff out. Almost 50 years after his death, they're still putting stuff out and saying, oh, here's a new record. And you wonder whether or not Hendrix would have wanted any of that stuff being heard by anybody.
Oh, absolutely. And right from the get-go, I remember as a kid, I was buying up a lot of that stuff. Vinyl would come out, and they'd be outtakes from his R&B days. Yeah. You know, and I'd be going, what? You know, this isn't the Hendrix I know. Now, of course, later on, I appreciate a lot of that. But it was total abuse at that time.
Yeah. So you have a project in all this conversation we've had about how to get attention and artists doing things for themselves, getting help. You're involved with something called the Emerging Artist Network, which helps connect artists with brands. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that's all about?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, my good friend Dan Lipson and our goal with this, it actually was sort of born from Big Hat. He had come out with a suggestion of finding some sort of corporate sponsorship or funding for that band. And then, of course, that all got sidetracked, but it really sort of gave birth to this idea for us of, what, it would be great, going back to what you and I were talking about earlier about longevity, giving an upstart band the revenue is enough revenue in order to survive that first couch potato tour, where labels do not have A&R budgets anymore to support a band. We're just thinking, okay, well, brand patronage thrives in other areas. Sponsorship in the sports world is gigantic, and sponsorship in the music world is just a 10% cut of that pie of, I think it was a $12 billion industry. That absolutely there'd be a way to get beyond this mindset of where you're selling out or your integrity is compromised with a relationship with brands. And I'm now, that's speaking from an artist's perspective, and me, boy, I would be the first to really put up that wall of no. That's the last thing you want to do. You do not want an artist to have to feel like they have to steer in a certain direction, for the sake of pleasing a brand relationship. Instead, I look at it as a brand, a cohesive relationship, a brand patronage, to where what we're trying to do is create a relationship between artists where a brand gets behind an artist. They have a synergy. They have something in common with each other. It doesn't have to be where, like, they're going out and eating their candy bar and going, hey, I'm eating this candy bar. It's more like, it could be something, if it was an environmental thing, if it was something that they shared a goal in common, maybe some charitable goal in common or something like that gives them a message that they have in common. That's what you find. And we would like to create relationships between brands and artists where, obviously the artists, the bands get exposure through this brand partnership, and they also get revenue from the relationship, either through licensing or support through live performances, whatever the case may be. And then the brands in turn, they start developing this relationship with these new artists, ever-growing fan base, which grows exponentially as long as the band's out there making waves. And as you and I said too, there's tons of great music out there. The trick is being able to filter it. So these brands can actually become the filter.
Do the artists approach you and then you connect them with brands? How do you find the artists? I know that there's a metric for figuring out like what their kind of heat level is to then match them with brands, but how do you actually do kind of, I guess for lack of a better word, the A&R on who the acts are?
A little of both, actually, but we built our own proprietary data aggregator that sifts through all the internet info, all the social media and streams and so forth, and can identify artists that are making waves out there down to the city, down to regions of, so it allows for, say, if we're working with a brand and they want to target a certain area of the country, maybe they have a campaign they're working on. We can find artists in that area that they may have something in common with, that share similar interests and so forth. Our data platform serves as our first level of identification. Finding these bands that are out there in those specific areas who are making waves, who have something. Then, obviously, our ears go to it and we listen to them, and if we like them, we think it's great. And that's when it gets really exciting, because you find some great sounding bands out there. And then from there it goes to presenting them to the brand and say, hey, what do you think of these guys? And then we go, and if they go, oh man, these guys are great. Then we go to the band and we go, hey, would you be into this relationship? And here's what your obligation would be. It would be a longer type relationship because it allows for a series of performances, a song that they would use that gives that song exposure, and it gives time for that exposure to really take hold, as opposed to a one-shot deal like a festival or something like that, where you have a brand sponsored festival or something and then it's all done. This is more of an ongoing relationship. And it can be, depending on the artist, it can be more indirect. Like I said, that's like it's a totally tailored relationship. And the whole idea is that we're saying to the brand, look, you want these artists to be who they are. You don't want them to have to tailor their sound to what you think your next marketing move is. Because if this guy blows up and you were a part of that just by being in their space and by helping to expose this band, it does nothing but make you look good as well.
Yeah.
So that's the whole perspective we're working from.
That's very cool. So where can people find out more about Emerging Artist Network?
It is emergingartistnetwork.com. Also, I should say that it's in development to a degree. We're doing some refining now, so I'm sort of hesitant to do the major push on it because we have some new features. The big thing about our thing is we have what's called the EAN score, Emerging Artist Network score, and literally through all of the information that we pull up, we give a score number, which sort of sounds, I don't know. It just put it. It gives you a level rating between 0 and 50, and it's really interesting. It's been interesting to observe because obviously the Beyoncés and would be up towards the top of in the 40s. I've never seen anybody hit 50. And then the bands that are making waves can be anywhere usually I've found between 11 and the low 20s. That's a broad area. And there is a ton of bands that come up. So the data that we provide, everything that we provide is free to the artist. We do not charge the artist for this service.
Very cool.
So yes, we definitely invite any bands or artists to go to our website and sign up.
So if you could change the tubes in the music business and make it into anything that you wanted, what would your ideal music business look like today?
In a way, we've sort of talked about it. I would like to see a visit back to, or a new relationship between artists and those such as yourself that have music industry savvy. I would like to see more of a working relationship develop again, to, in some ways, not to sound really drastic, but to save music in a way, I'm just concerned that we are not seeing artists develop to their top level. And then also I would like to see, in all this noise and racket and all the tons of great music that's out there and tons of not so great music out there, better filtering. I still think nobody has really come up with the filter of this day of age.
Cool. All right, so here I'm going to give you a chance to be the filter for a minute. Give me one record that people who are listening to the podcast should go out and buy right now.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, boy. Are you sure it's just one?
You can get, you know what? Everybody seems to want to give a new one and then a catalog one, but I'm like, if it's more than one, then go ahead, hit me, whatever you got.
Well, let me tell you, it's just good Lord, is which one is it this week, or which one is it this month, or sometimes it's whenever you're in that period where you're really listening to stuff, and I go through periods where I'm not listening to anything. But The first thing that comes to mind of current, well, I put it this way: a year ago, it was Sturgill Simpson. It just blew me out of the water. And then right now, it's the Shelters. I really like their new album a lot. And what I like about those guys is, again, what I was saying earlier, is not only do they back it up by being great songwriters, but they're a true band and they can back it up with their live performance. They're great live. So I'd say get their new album, The Shelters.
Cool. That's a couple of amazing recommendations. And obviously, if you belong to a streaming service or if you're on iTunes, make sure to check out Big Hat too. Okay, last thing I'm going to ask you about. I saw over the weekend you did a gig with Yacht Rock.
Yeah.
With Brian Ray, who I think Brian's going to be on the show sometime soon.
Awesome.
And you guys played The Boys Are Back in Town, and it was on Saturday, which was kind of, I don't know if you knew this, but I think that was Phil Lynot's birthday. He would have been 67 years old. Did you guys know that?
Holy smokes. I had no earthly idea.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Yeah.
I can't wait to tell the others that. That just came up from when I heard that Brian was coming to the event because Robbie Dupree was playing at that on the show with Yacht Rock, and Brian used to play with Robbie Dupree way back when he was a kid, and so I said, oh man, and Brian and I are good buddies. It's like, all right, what can we play? And we were already in the show on this dual lead theme. I was joining in with Yacht Rock guys to play songs, and it's so much fun. Those guys, that's a whole story of its own. They're a phenomenon. But they're great players, and part of the fun of when I sit in with them on occasion is doing these songs that from that smooth rock late 70s periods, like Orleans Still the One, with those intricate crazy guitar solos, or Andrew Gold solos.
Oh God, Andrew Gold and Christopher Cross. It is funny how that stuff is pilloried is a little bit cheesy, but when you listen to the studio craft and the musicianship behind some of that stuff, it's staggeringly brilliant stuff.
It really is, and that's what really is a large part of the success of that band, Yacht Rock, with a younger audience too. So, but not getting too far off track. But back to that, I was like, okay, well, heck, if Brian's there, we've got to do something together. And so I thought, Boys Are Back in Town, perfect. That'll be in theme. It's a good rock song, and I love that song, and I figured the audience would love it. So that was it, and man, it was a blast.
Yeah, and you both had it looked like SGs you were both playing, right?
Yep. We were in theme with SGs.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, when I think of Yacht Rock, I don't really think of Thin Lizzy, but I'm sure it was really cool. And I'm curious who played the Gorman part. I mean, how did you and Brian figure out like who was going to play whose part on that? Because that was Thin Lizzy's thing, was the whole dual guitar attack and playing complementary parts. How did you guys work that out? Did you sit down beforehand, or like what did you how'd you figure that out?
Oh man, it was all email. We were going, all right, man, which part do you want? Which part are you feeling? The low part or the high part? I couldn't tell you which was Scott Gorham's part. I just thought, okay, all right, I'll take the high, you take the low.
That's cool. That's cool.
That was it. But yeah, with the Yacht Rock thing, like, heck, we're doing a show this weekend that's called Led Zeppelin versus The Who, a rock fight. And that's a whole other spin, and that's all we do is we pummel the audience with nothing but Led Zeppelin and The Who the whole night.
But how do you play Led Zeppelin? And I guess you're you have two different guitars, because you're playing the Page tunings, right? Which you can't play the Who stuff on the Page tunings, obviously, right?
No, and there's two of us, like there's Yacht Rock's guitarist, Mark Donnells, and myself, and so we divvy up the parts, we play them similar to the record or whatever, and yeah, different guitars. You got to play. Yeah, I have an SG Special I use for the Who stuff, and we have Tellys and Les Pauls for the Zepp stuff.
And I think I saw on your Twitter feed that you had gotten a double neck Gibson out of the closet from somewhere.
Yeah,
is that going to be out for the show? The 12-6 Page thing.
That absolutely. You got to have the double neck there. We play Song Remains the Same, so you got to have it.
Amazing. Well, I'm sure people will look forward to seeing you on the road with Sheryl. Although I know things kind of calm down at the end of the summer and the touring might take a break. So what are your plans for the rest of 2016, and then we'll let you go?
Actually, we have a fabulous show coming up with Sheryl that I'm so looking forward to, the Outlaw Festival on September 18th.
That's in Pennsylvania, right? In Scranton, I think?
Yep.
Neil Young's going to be on that gig too, right?
Yeah. Neil Young, Willie Nelson, Chris Robinson, Brotherhood, Brothers Osborne. I can't remember. I remember them all. LeAnn Rimes. It's just going to be an amazing day. I'm really excited about that. So that I'm really looking forward to. Sheryl, yeah, she's working, she's writing and recording for a new album, or albums, plural, believe it or not. And but we still play, 1 to 3 times a month. So that is a great band. It's a family on the road, and we're tremendously excited every time we get together.
Cool. Well, we'll keep an eye out for you with Sheryl. We'll keep an eye out for you with Big Hat. People will check out Emerging Artist Network. And thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today, Peter. I really appreciate it. Also, we didn't mention it, but you are the co-founder of 65 Amps, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of cool stuff happening there. So if you're a guitar player, if you haven't heard of 65 Amps, get out of your basement. But definitely check out 65 Amps, too, because they make some unbelievable amplifiers.
All right, yeah. Thank you very much.
All right,
that's
Peter.
a whole other story.
Yeah, exactly.
You can read that in the Gearhead mags.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be Premier Guitar. That I never could be. So I'll leave that to those guys. But anyway, but it was great talking to you, Peter.
Likewise, Jim. Thank you so much for having me. I hope I didn't talk your ear off. That was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much, man. Thanks for the time.
Love your show, man. I got to tell you, I was so glad when I read the title of the show. I was like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. So, I can't speak highly enough of this new podcast.
Thanks for spreading the word with all your fans, because I know you got a lot of followers, and I really appreciate what you've done to try to bring some awareness to the show too, Pete. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, man. Have a great day.
All right, Peter. See you, bud.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, that'll do it for this episode of How to Fix the Music Business. I'd like to thank once again Peter Stroud for joining me on the show today. Check out Peter on the Road with Sheryl Crow, and keep an eye out for Big Hat. They're going to be putting out some new music soon, and you can check out their previous release, the Big Hat EP, on Spotify, iTunes, and better-known streaming and download music services. And if you're a musician, head over to emergingartistnetwork.com and check them out. Lastly, I'd like to thank you, the listener, for tuning in and giving the show a listen. If you could take the time to go onto iTunes and leave us a positive review, or better yet, subscribe to the show, I'd really appreciate it. It helps elevate the visibility of the show and enables me to keep bringing you great guests like Peter. Well, I'm going to split, go listen to some records. I hope you are too, and we'll see you next time on How to Fix the Music Business. Take care.